As the first snowflakes began to lightly coat the cobblestone streets, the people of medieval Inverbottom knew it was time to prepare for yet another winter holdup. This wasn't just any quaint European town, mind you. It was a village of such unremarkable features that getting lost there might actually be more exciting than finding your way out. Inverbottom, nestled comfortably between two lovingly disinterested hills, was a place where the sheep organized their wanderings like clockwork, and the local baker once received an award for the most uninspired loaf. Yet its real claim to fame wasn't its remarkable lack of fame, but its peculiar approach to winter weather. In those medieval days, a winter weather advisory wasn't delivered with a gentle ping to one's pocket-sized device. No, it was heralded through the delicate tolling of a bronze bell atop Old Bwindle Tower, a tower famously afflicted with leaning problems, not unlike that of a certain Italian counterpart. Only this, one teetered in complete disregard for architectural standards. You see, when the bell tolled, it meant only one thing. The time to panic about being buried under a snowdrift was at least 3 days too late. There were no last-minute grocery runs or panicked retrievals of laundry from the line. Instead, families huddled in, lit fires that should have been stoked yesterday, and began the ceremonial stirring of porridge pots, ritualistic as it was essential. And really, what says post-feast better than endless bowls of greyish gruel? The townsfolk exhibited a curious indifference, a resigned acceptance that, much like the Earth's gravity, snow would inevitably fall, and often in amounts that caused entire wagons, and sometimes Aunt Eleanor, to disappear until spring thaw. Aunt Eleanor, of course, was renowned for her peculiar ability to tell the future incorrectly, especially about the weather. She once mistook a blizzard poem for a summer forecast, leading to the Great Sandal shortage of 1314. As the snow layered upon Inverbottom like brisk sculpting by an over-enthusiastic confectioner, you might imagine that the town would enter a state of languid hibernation. But such was the rhythm of life that the town clerk, Mr. Upton, insisted on continuing his duties with steadfast optimism. His records, though admirably illegible, documented events such as the annual festival of staying inside and the famed midwinter dusting of the shelves, where dust was never disturbed. The children, immune to the notion of cold-induced boredom, engaged in their winter tradition of snow battlement building, or, as scholars speculate from the records, perhaps just elaborate formations used to hide the evidence of missing Aunt Eleanor's. Indoors, the town's inhabitants knitted, crafted tales, and sipped on what might charitably be called fortified winter teas, largely to forget that the sun's eagerness to be seen plummeted alongside their excitement for various root vegetables. Now, if you're comfortably cocooned beneath your sheets, feeling the slow drift into slumber, it might be the right moment for me to suggest something of mutual benefit. If these stories help you drift off, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade into dreamland, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. As the long, sleepy tale of Inverbottom's wintry tranquility wanders on, keep your voice down, for the bell may toll again, heralding more adventures in snow and slumberous days, as a brisk winter wind whispers secrets through the frosted branches of the sleepiest of villages. We unfurl into our story with curiosity, like a sleepy cat swirling its tail. Welcome to the age when a winter weather advisory was less of a cautionary notice and more of a mythical bell tolling across the frozen realms, signaling the grand annual game of find the town under all this snow. Once upon a time, during the latter days of the 18th century, there was a quaint little town nestled snugly in the snow-laden landscape of New England. This town, let's whimsically call it Snowbury, was home to a peculiar breed of people who absolutely adored their weather-induced hibernations. Mind you, these weren't the hibernations of folklore, filled with rest and recuperation. No, the good people of Snowbury turned an instant whiteout into a historical version of hide-and-seek, where the village played an impressive disappearing act each winter. Our story unfolds as we tiptoe into the lives of the drowsy denizens of Snowbury. On a particularly frigid winter's day, the town crier, Betsy Tinwhistle, a name befitting her shrill-voiced announcements, emerged from her cottage, bundled like an onion in layers upon layers of wool. It was she who had the dubious honor of alerting the village about impending snowfall, thanks to her trusty weather stick. This was no ordinary piece of wood, dear listener. No, this was a weather stick that was said to possess the uncanny ability to forecast snow by turning ever so slightly, like a hesitant dancer dreading an encore. As Betsy squinted into the horizon, her pupils narrowing to slits against the relentless glare of winter's white canvas, she declared to the eager ears of sleepy townsfolk, "Prepare yourselves, for it snoweth forthwith." The words echoed into the crisp air, undoubtedly lost to some as they continued to embrace the warmth of a thick quilt. But to those willing to brave the cold, it meant gathering provisions like newfangled barometers, only to safeguard their peace of mind that it was indeed cold. Life in Snowbury during such times was as still as an oil lamp in the dead of night. The ground, a soft carpet of snow cushioning footsteps, hid beneath it curious artifacts, forgotten hats, sleds waylaid by misadventure, and the occasional shovel, solidified in position like a medieval weaponry display. It was a season of camaraderie too, when families would huddle together, spinning yarns and sometimes just spinning yarn while their minds wandered into half-realized dreams of spring. As more snow clung to rooftops, the world above and the one below became a study in contrasts. Bright, reflective white gave alpenglow hues by day and shadowy silhouettes dressed in indigo by night. It was a winter wonderland, silent except for the occasional complaint of a creaking eave or the distant jingle of a harnessed winter sleigh, both capable of stirring the kind of excitement you only felt upon realizing there's one forgotten cookie left for Santa, months overdue. Inside their homes, Snowbury folk engaged in winter's finest indoor pursuits. Card games stretched late into the night, transforming the humble deck into a tempest of competitive shuffles, and knitting needles clicked away ceaselessly, crafting woolly masterpieces that could keep the frost at bay. As familiar faces bundled around fireplaces, they often remarked how, much like their weather reports, the stories grew deeper as the snow piled higher. And so, in this serene yet amusing tableau, time drifted like a slow, swirling flake, eventually leading to those hopeful days when the snows would recede. The emboldened sun would announce its triumphant return, and with it, the sleepy town of Snowbury would awaken, emerging like a daisy from what had seemed an endless frost. But let us linger a little longer in this whimsical moment of history. As your breathing grows gentle and your eyes heavier, hold this charming scene in mind. A town at rest, beneath its soft, snowy quilt, waiting for daylight's first golden yawn. And wonder, if you dare, what was to come as the snugly knit villagers, gripped by tales of snowbound secrets, prepared for the season's crescendo, sure to keep them warm until spring's arrival. In the chilly embrace of a winter long past, there nestled a town called Florendon, a place where the idea of a snowflake was not merely an innocent sprinkle from above, but a harbinger of an impending whiteout adventure. Back then, the notion of a winter weather advisory was akin to receiving a cryptic letter from a slightly deranged weatherman who, rather than issuing warnings, seemed to play an annual game of guess and freeze. Picture it. Florendon, a quaint little town sewn together with cobblestone streets, chimney tops poking skyward like curious gnomes, and townsfolk as hearty as old cheese. Florendon's residents were familiar with snow and its habits, like an annoying houseguest who never takes a hint. But this didn't stop them from periodically underestimating its ambition. On the eve of what was supposed to be a light dusting, according to Olaf the Oblivious, the town's unofficial, if not slightly confused, meteorologist, Florendon was serenely unaware of the blizzard making its inexorable march from the north. Townsfolk settled into their evening rituals, believing that, Their world would still be a walkable white tomorrow. Alas, that belief was as thin as the ice under Olaf's snowshoes. As night fell, so did the snow, in a curtain so thick it could have been a prop in a production of the world's least thrilling opera. Florendon, slowly and spectacularly, disappeared beneath a sneak attack of swirling, frosty chaos. By morning, the town found itself cocooned under several feet of immovable, unstirred grapenuts, which, come to think of it, snow does slightly resemble. It's just as bland and about as easy to shovel. Each house was now a lonely igloo, each street a vague indentation in a lunar landscape. The only visible inhabitants were chimney smokes, puffing like tiny locomotives, urgently seeking a clearer timetable. Now the flurries and Olaf's wildly inaccurate forecast were far from unusual, but what made this storm particularly memorable was the curious way Florendon's residents handled such blustery obscurity. I see you pondering, dear listener, about their methods of survival. First, there was Ethel Blackwater, known as much for her talent with embroidery as her penchant for 20-minute naps on the hour. Ethel, a stalwart of snowy wisdom, concocted the snow candle, a bizarre but effective blend of beeswax, twine, and enchanted, possibly bewitched, tea leaves. Burn one, she swore, and it would create a cozy radius of warmth and sensible conversation. Meanwhile, the ever-inventive Simon Brindle took it upon himself to ensure that no one's spirits were as low as the external temperature. He invented what he whimsically termed the community slide, assembling a series of precarious but joyously effective toboggan routes straight from front doors. Thus, if one's abode was positively trapped, a quick, thrilling descent transported citizens to each other's thresholds, gripping mugs of cocoa and camaraderie. However, not everyone in Florendon found ingenious ways to navigate the climb. Millie, the postmistress, who once famously filed a letter addressed simply to "that guy over there," was less fortunate. Many recalled her infamous pledge to keep the mail going, come hell or deep snow. You can imagine the comedic underbelly when her somewhat soggy mail route was obscured, resulting in an accidental conglomeration of mail, including an engagement proposal meant for Newland Manor that wrongly arrived at the library, sparking much confusion and, some wryly noted, a boost in literacy rates. As the days progressed, the community grew closer, quite literally snowbound into a single entity of warmth and cooperation, with occasional grumbling disagreements over whether it was tandas of Handel or tour de goûter of chess that truly captured the spirit of winter endurance. And so it was. In this cozy northern oblivion, Florendon's story mirrored that of many communities of its era, towns vanishing elegantly under blankets of snow, like whispered secrets under the watchful eye of an ancient sky. Soon, as the winds calmed and the snow began its seasonal retreat, life would melt back into its familiar patterns, the town's disappearance becoming an annual anecdote, told with laughter and a touch of wonder. Now, as we gently wander with sleepy wonder through our thoughts, leaving the wintry symphony of Florendon behind, there arises another tale on the horizon, a canvas of history waiting to unfurl its joys and quirks upon us. As the early winter sun considered waking up, the village of Frostbottom nestled in its usual chilly stoicism. Here, somewhere under a thick, woolly blanket of snow, lived the industrious folk who claimed they weren't particularly keen on keeping up with the likes of time or temperature. This was a place where winter had learned to unpack its bags and get comfortable, sometimes even moving in its annoying relatives, blizzards named Bruno and gusty Aunt Gail. Yet the villagers soldiered on with the resolve of someone who's lost the TV remote, but absolutely refuses to get up from the couch to find it. Back in the day, a winter weather advisory didn't arrive via breaking news alerts on pocket-sized screens or had twinkling graphics animated by technologically gifted gremlins. No, it came directly from Old Man Winter himself, who lived at the top of the hill, precisely where everyone's ears would be at their iciest and least patient for meddlesome winds that argued like old cats trapped in a sack. The villagers, under the guidance of Old Man Winter's sage advice, prepared for these advisories with the determination of squirrels hoarding nuts before an acorn-running competition. They built enormous barns not just for hay, but for hope. Hope that spring might eventually thaw their goose-pimpled souls. These barns doubled as community centers where, packed like peas in an ice pond, villagers gathered to swap stories, share warmth, and engage in the highly competitive annual longest icicle contest. The Frost Bottom School employed a peculiar method of winter woes adaptation, unofficially dubbing Tuesdays as snowed-in reading days. Teachers, after digging tunnels through the snow like scholarly moles, arrived to find their pupils snuggled with books that doubled as both educational tools and makeshift insulation. Maths became utterly irrelevant once snowfall reached a height equal to that of the average villager's patience, usually around January. The evolution of the humble snow shovel in Frostbottom is another tale worth an excursion into. These were not just metal tools with wooden handles, they were masterpieces of practicality born from necessity. Legend weaves a whimsical tale of one Mr. Edward Shovel, who, having suffered one snow-induced existential crisis too many, decided to invent the shovel-o-matic. This marvelous contraption of wood, metal, and a touch of stubbornness was designed to expedite the digging process with a flick of a wrist, defying the laws of physics and common sense alike. Its effectiveness was, however, about as reliable as a cat with a PhD in dog management. When the town collectively blinked and realized it had vanished under layers of non-lamentable snow, nothing could beat the annual Frostbottom Lantern Parade, a time-honored tradition that celebrated rediscovery. Underneath twinkling stars that might have been mistaken for winter lighthouses in style, lanterns of every hue were crafted to match the creativity of their boundless imaginations. Illuminating paths previously hidden by their frosty cloaks, the villagers promenaded, marveling at the newly revealed world around them, an exercise in geography that was nothing short of a scenic exploration. And not to be forgotten were the illustrious Frostbottom sweaters, knitted masterpieces that could double as well-insulated tents should the need for overnight outdoor accommodations arise. Mrs. Tilda Threadwell's skill in wielding knitting needles was renowned, and her creations wrapped the whole town in colourful coziness that contradicted the cold more fiercely than a misquoted proverb. As winter unfolded its chilly symphony, the people of Frostbottom remained serene in their snow-covered exile, dreaming of flowers and bee-stumbled fields just as faint silver linings hidden behind overcast skies promised spring's return. Meanwhile, rumors circulated that Old Man Winter had been spotted drafting blueprints for an ambitious project codenamed Frostbottom's Great Thaw. And so, with the moon hanging low and heavy, like a custard-filled eclair in the night sky, another part of our wintry tale draws us away on a soft cloud of snowflake lullabies, softly preparing to tiptoe towards the next piece of this intricate, frosty puzzle. As the chilly breeze of our narrative drifts onward, tonight we venture into the quaint town of Coal Junction, nestled somewhere on the snowy expanse of yesteryear where horses had snowshoes. Because why should humans have all the fun with cold weather fashion adaptations? This little town had a unique knack for turning a mere whisper of snow night into polar oblivion. The citizens of Coal Junction were no strangers to winter's whimsical whims. You see, back then, weather forecasting was more of an art than a science. With no sophisticated meteorological tools or satellite technology, the townsfolk relied heavily on Old Man Jasper's knee. Legend has it, his arthritic joint could predict a snowstorm more accurately than any barnyard animal or barometer. If it ached, they knew 3 extra layers were in order. If it creaked, then heaven helped the optimistic who left their shovel at home. In a delightfully poetic turn of misfortune, just 2 days before Christmas of 1836, Old Man Jasper's knee made the most ungodly sound, akin to a rusty gate. Such was the timbre of his creaking that it was said to have been heard by Miss Petunia Blathersfield, who lived on the outskirts of town with her 33 cats and equally as many woolen shawls. Her cats, it should be noted, were proficient in dreadfully misguiding heat-seeking methods in such weather. With the collective groan over Jasper's audible alarm, residents braced themselves for what was predicted to be a moderate flurry. though the phrase had the elasticity of an optimistic sweater doomed to unravel. Little did anyone know this forecast was drastically undersold. When snowflakes as big as their hopes for spring started falling, the townspeople were hit with a harsh realization they were about to experience what you'd call an unexpected snowpocalypse. To put it in context, the whole town was designed like most towns of the era, efficiently built with horse-drawn sleighs and snow shovels in mind, but lacking any plans for the potential of epic entombment in snow. Doors opened outwards, a minor oversight when upwards of 5 feet or more of puff descended from the heavens. You soon found yourself living in what one visiting card shark called an involuntary igloo. The enchanting beauty of snow had quickly become a frigid white labyrinth, layering the rooftops so thickly that truly inspiring works of icicle architecture began to form. It was mentioned in the Cold Junction Gazette, distributed astonishingly, due to a brave pigeon courier, that 3 entire families merged households through the consummation of snow tunnels just to get to the town market. How'd they know where to start? Using Mrs. Meringue's aromatic pies as guides, of course. And then there were the mysterious cases of opportunistic snowmen cropping up overnight, each seeming to appear in more outlandish locations, upon rooftops and barn lofts. To this day, no conclusive evidence has pinpointed the exact mastermind behind this frosty confusion, though witnesses claim to have seen young Elmer Duggery brandishing a carrot at them in a suspiciously artistic manner, the very model of snowman devotion. Despite the ballooning snowdrifts resembling frosted Everest attempts, the residents found ways to cope, fueled by sheer stubbornness and Mr. Higginbottom's mulled cider, which had a taste only rivaled by its hypnotizing ability to cloud reasonable judgment. This particular beverage played a noble role during the Snowstorm Challenge of 1836, encouraging residents to sing carols at the top of their voices, merely to locate one another, but inadvertently started the first ever community choir competition. Eventually, in their tenacious attempts to break free, or some might claim, simply to survive the mysteries of winter, townsfolk developed an efficient series of underground marketplaces, the innovation of which they celebrated with a week-long festival dedicated to Snowstay Day. Unfortunately for some, including the shy Solomons who never got the memo, they emerged into spring looking rather like castaways adventuring out of a snow movie set. While Cold Junction eventually thawed and returned to its usual rhythm, the storm and its reckless obscurities were indelibly etched into town lore, providing fertile ground for endless fireside tales. But let us leave Cold Junction here for a moment, content under its dreamy mantle of legend and winter's breadth, as elsewhere, another town awaits with its own peculiar, stormy legacy, ready to unfold gently on the horizon, as the good people of North America bundled themselves under layers of wool and fleece, fearing more the chore of shoveling than the actual winter chill. We meander back to a time when a simple winter weather advisory could send entire towns into a frosty, impromptu version of a disappearing act. Picture, if you will, the year 1836, in a quaint corner of what is now known as the Midwest. Small wooden houses, each one a sturdy little soldier against the elements, stood firm. This was a time before meteorologists explained every snowflake with Doppler radar precision. Folks relied on instinct, animal behavior, and the color of morning skies to prepare for what the week might bring. Of course, this was neither foolproof nor particularly accurate, but when an entire village is betting on the woolly bear caterpillar over a scientific forecast, you realize a fence is the best defense they had. During such winters, people adapted, and by adapted, I mean they adopted a very particular winter sport, hearthside hibernation, which involved a rigorous schedule of sipping warm cider and storytelling sessions by the fire. There were no viral videos to entertain, but never underestimate the power of a good yarn spun by Great Uncle Theodore about the one time he saw a snowflake as big as a bread loaf. In this bygone era of simplistic bliss, there was the curious case of Blanket Township. With a name as cozy as an old quilt, you'd think they might extend more warmth to their visitors. However, the township gained notoriety among travelers for entirely vanishing under a blanket of winter snow every third year like clockwork. Eyewitnesses would swear it wasn't just snow that consumed the town, but a peculiar stillness, as if the world had paused, taking a deep breath before unleashing more weather mischief elsewhere. The residents, of course, took this periodic vanishing act in stride, developing an unshakable resilience. Stubbornly merry as the snow swirled relentlessly down, they maintained a blithe demeanor. What else could one do when faced with the prospect of literally dig-dugging your way to the neighbor's house for a cup of sugar? There wasn't always a clear path to follow, much less the sight of the distant church steeple to guide the way. Yet every vanished winter was met with a sculptural mastery in snow tunnels and forts that would have Cornelius the Conqueror himself green with envy. Unbeknownst to the outside world, underneath this sea of snow, life in Blanket Township didn't just stop, it thrived. Hidden from view, they would host a yearly Gone with the Snow Festival, celebrating their hidden status with a joviality that echoed through the layers of powder above. So thick was the snow during these festivities, residents joked it dampened the sound of their revelry, lest they wake the wind god from his frosty slumber. But this blissful oblivion was occasionally interrupted by mischief, or as some would call it, the frosting Friday prank. Youngsters, plucky with youthful exuberance, would fashion endless snowmen in crazy numbers, populating the mounds like ancient warriors ready for a slow, icy march. Travelers who managed to stumble into town at such a time would find a reception committee of unnervingly silent, cat-wearing figures, making them wonder if Blanket Township was indeed a figment of their chilled imaginations. As afternoon bled into evening, the weary visitors would at last be welcomed by a warm hearth and the aforementioned cider, shared alongside spirited tales of the Snowmen Revolt of '32, shaped by nothing more than yarn and the old tattle of the time. And so, with a knowing wink to the intricate dance of snowflakes and forgotten paths, one might say that perhaps Blanket Township never vanished at all. Instead, it simply became part of a seasonal swathe so uniquely its own that to slip beneath it was less forgettable, more magical, a cozy tradition steered by fate's frosty fingers. Let's gently close this chapter on our township's winter revelries and continue with our snowbound journey. The next destination awaits with its stories sleeping beneath a similar coat, ready to be softly uncovered. In the heart of a wintry landscape, nestled amongst the snow-laden hills and perpetually frost-bitten forests, lay the petite village of Permafrost Peak. Here, winter was less of a season and more of a persistent lifestyle choice, like collecting cats or wearing socks with sandals. As one might expect, the villagers were snugly clad in wool, the collective product of enough sheep to field a respectable football match. These woolly warriors against winter's chill would spend months preparing for the seasonal bout with nature, knitting garments so thick, each sweater could double as a sleep sack. On particularly blustery days, the villagers would vanish under layers of scarves and mittens, looking more like comically oversized snowmen than actual humans. Now, in those days, what you and I may call a simple winter weather advisory was something of an event. You see, back then, meteorology was more of an interpretive dance than a science. This dance was typically performed using an assortment of tools that might have doubled as props for a particularly whimsical stage production. Among these were tarnished brass barometers, whose reliability was often debated over hearty bowls of stew, and cloud charts, more useful as umbrellas than forecasting tools. One exemplary resident of Permafrost Peak, Old Man Weatherby, took his weather predictions quite seriously. Armchair meteorologist by day and recliner meteorologist by night, he prided himself on his ability to discern weather patterns from the way his knees creaked. His forecasts were the stuff of local legend, once predicting an exact snowfall amount because his left ear had itched at precisely the right angle. That said, on more than one occasion, he had confused an approaching nor'easter with his neighbor's chimney smoke. Nevertheless, when Old Man Weatherby donned his worn spectacles and peered into the distance, the town listened. And so it was, on a copper-skied Tuesday morning, as the first tells of a narrative storm approached, that Weatherby issued a proclamation. "Batten thine hatches," he cried, much like a ship's captain from an entirely different historical period. The town prepared with a ritualistic fervor akin to unleashing Christmas early. Stores were cleared of essentials, marmalade, for some inexplicable reason, being the first to go. Children were instructed in the ancient and revered art of sled roofing, an activity that involved waxing sleds for swift descents down the now-slicked village lanes, while their parents sequenced a cacophony of cowbells to ward off avalanches. Each chosen bell had a unique ring, supposedly confusing even the most determined, if non-existent, mountain-devouring snow beast. By the time winter blew its icy trumpets of arrival, the village had nestled itself beneath a quilted landscape of white. Roofs peeked bashfully out from beneath snowcaps. Roads turned to icy pathways more fit for post-snowshoe rather than pedestrian travel. And, quite possibly, the baker's half-finished gingerbread house, which had stood quietly in her window, became a frost-locked fortress of sweet aromas. Soon, dusk settled over the village, the sky blushing as if embarrassed by its own frigid demeanor. Hearths crackled warmly in each home, the flickering firelight a beacon of cozy defiance against the wild, snowy barrage beyond. Window panes. Families gathered around the warmth, sharing stories passed down like heirlooms, imbued with a comforting mix of hyperbole and nostalgia. Above it all, Old Man Weatherby looked out on the village with a well-earned smugness, sipping tea from a mug that proclaimed him purveyor of precipitation. The storm had brought with it the seal of winter's true embrace, and beneath the snow blanket, Permafrost Peak slumbered soundly, dreaming dreams as soft and drifty as the very flakes that framed their world. As the night deepened, slowly, the snow tapered off, leaving the village in a deep, glistening sleep. All was peace, until the distant sound of muffled bells jingled through the air, hinting at more tales, and perhaps more marmalade mishaps, in the chapters yet to come. The town of Frosty Hollow existed in a peculiar state of eternal winter, a place where snowflakes were more frequent than tea in a teapot. Back in the 18th century, when woolen pantaloons were the height of fashion and thermal underwear was still a twinkle in an inventor's eye, the routinely harsh winters were a chilling affair. Yet, the residents seemed peculiarly untroubled by the fact that their settlement frequently resembled a ghost town under a never-ending blanket of snow. Unlike today's society, where a flurry can send a shiver of panic through an entire state, the folks of Frosty Hollow simply shrugged and continued sipping their mulled cider. Imagine a day when a simple weather advisory was equivalent to your neighbor casually mentioning in passing, looks like another snowstorm's coming. Better get the knitting out." The indifference was particularly palpable among the town's population of snowball artists, a group as pioneering as they were peculiar. In Frosty Hollow, building a snowman was not only a recreational activity, it was practically an Olympic sport. People would gather for the Great Boulder Roll, where skilled rollings of snow were judged, much like nothing you've ever seen. This winter wonderland wasn't all snowballs and merriment, though. One rather intriguing character who roamed these snowy streets was the town's very own Mrs. Winifred Chillingworth. With a name destined for winter supremacy, she was a witty lass who claimed to have invented the practical snow broom. It wasn't a broom at all, but a contraption that was more akin to a flattened rake designed for sweeping off roofs and hapless passers-by. Her entrepreneurial spirit knew no bounds, and tales were told of how she once successfully convinced the mayor that winter air was healthier than summer air, demonstrating it by astonishingly reading an entire newspaper, allegedly infused with classic novels, while submerged up to her knees in snow. Now, Frosty Hollow's mayor was a spirited gentleman named Tobias Drizzlewisk, clearly born to lead in a setting that rarely required distinction between his name and the weather. Forecast. Mayor Drizzlewisk was known for his fondness for strategic snow relocation, a policy he'd implemented after one particularly heavy fall left him trapped indoors for an entire weekend with only soup and debate manuals for company. One day, during what was blithely referred to as a minor accumulation, the plight of a mysterious missing snow shovel incited a minor hullabaloo. It was a well-known fact that Mr. Cadwallader, the blacksmith, an unofficial town soothsayer, had trademarked the shovel's use for his renowned snow relocation theory, which he eloquently dubbed the Great Displacement. Evidently, someone had borrowed, a term used as loosely as the town's snow itself, his beloved tool, leaving him scrambling to predict the severity of the storm without his traditional methods. Rumor had it that local mischief maker, young Barnaby Thornapple, borrowed the shovel under the guise of an educational endeavor. His dear mother defended his act as a scientific exploration, as he attempted to see if a borrowed shovel could indeed create a real tunnel through time. Barnaby firmly believed this would lead him to the summertime of pastimes, where raspberry leaves still danced amid warmer breezes. The entire debacle reached an unexpected resolution when Mrs. Chillingworth, with her remarkable eye for misplaced items, spotted the shovel serving as a peculiar makeshift mast in the ever-popular snowboat play parked outside the town hall. Perhaps it had found a new purpose in sail-driven snowdrift exploration, but its historical role in the town's winter equilibrium couldn't possibly be dismissed. This episode was rightfully restored to its rightful place in the annals of Frosty Hollow's winter survival antics, and the townsfolk resumed their preparations for yet another enchanted blanket of winter's white embrace. Sitting by the hearth, children of Frosty Hollow listened to tales of snow shovel-scented capers, mesmerized by the flickering light and the gentle crackle of their own dreams weaving through the snowy night outside. And as Frosty Hollow's loyal inhabitants curled up, coaxing themselves gently into slumber, the whispers of endless snow adventures carried them into dreams of frostbitten fun. And so, with the whispering winds gently lulling our thoughts into the distance, we find ourselves irresistibly drawn into another softly murmured tale of winter's mysterious wonders. In the quiet stillness of a winter morning, the sun peeked through frosted windows, casting a soothing glow over the rolling mounds of snow that had discreetly consumed entire villages overnight. It was a time when warnings of winter weather were less a matter of forecasters on TV and more a subtle nod from Mother Nature herself. Perhaps a few extra honking geese headed south, or a suspiciously woolly sheep caught looking nervous. It was a simpler time, though not devoid of its own perils, especially for the towns that would vanish beneath the snow until the thaw graced their presence once again. In the hue of one such day, in the early years of the 19th century, deep in the scenic hamlets of New England, a little town known as Frost Hollow experienced its own brand of winter seclusion. If ever a town embraced the concept of hibernation, Frost Hollow perfected it. Come December, the townsfolk would pull out their finest quilts, draw the thickest curtains, and collectively agree that going outside until March was a task best left to the foolhardy or desperate for a touch of fresh air, or perhaps a change of scenery from the stalwart interior of their cottages. One of the most peculiar yet endearing traditions of the Frost Hollow residents was their annual Snow Out, a festival held on the last fair weather week of the year. The event, a comical marriage of practicality and festivity, involved the entire community engaging in what one might call a preemptive farewell to their familiar rooftops, sidewalks, and fences, all destined to become memory once smothered in snow. Townspeople would venture from home to home, potluck style, consuming their stored summer preserves, sharing tales that could warm even the chilliest of souls, and indulging in a local specialty, snowberry punch, a concoction so potent it could fuel tales fit to pair with the most flamboyant of quilts. The children of Frost Hollow eagerly awaited the snowfall, not understanding the serene beauty layered in the monotonous whiteness. Instead, they anticipated the joy and light-hearted fracas of their annual snow pit digging contest, a contest where teams would scramble to unearth their homes faster than neighboring children. To a child, elbow deep in a snowdrift, the town's annual disappearance wasn't a mere inconvenience, but a grand adventure, one heaped in the promise of character-building frolics and a camaraderie stronger than the icy grip of winter itself. Of course, nestled safely in the coziness of their well-insulated homes, the adults, fortified by their spirited winter preparations, gazed out, ruminating pensively. They were not strangers to surprise gifts of snow-induced solitude. These periods enforced reflection about the community's complex relationship with the winter season. They encouraged a certain stoic patience, a virtue forged amidst snow days best spent mending, brewing, and stacking logs at a speed made competitive once the first flake hit the ground. The town's unofficial blend of winter humor was led by old Harrington, a man as weathered as the logs from which his home was built. Known for his ability to predict the first snowstorm with a touch of rheumatic wit, he would say, "I dreaded the white blizzard's return, not for its impetuous cold, but for the fact that those shoveling my walkway will realize I'm not at home." He'd chuckle, knowing too well that the snow carried more than just chill. It brought stories that thawed his bones amidst frostbitten tales always shared around a friendly hearth. And so it was in Frost Hollow, year upon year, where simple weather advisories became a cozy calendar, marking not just the onslaught of winter, but the strength of community ties, tightening over steaming mugs of mulled cider, eagerly interrupted by the first sign of spring. One could argue this was a town good at disappearing, although equally adept at emerging renewed, much like the crocus pushing through the last remains of snow. As we leave the cozy, wintry embrace of Frost Hollow behind, remember that though winter wrapped these towns in snowy silence for months on end, it also gifted them with a rare kinship and resilience, a gift perhaps warmer than the heaviest quilt. As our journey hands over the frosty realm to the next, let's carry the warmth of these delightful, hidden histories as a companion, ready to charm us further along our journey back in time and snow. Ah, the quiet whisper of winter. Such an ordinary beginning for extraordinary tales. Imagine the old world under the frosty breath of a particularly harsh winter, where towns vanished beneath a silken blanket of snow, so profound you'd think nature was redecorating in minimalist white. In those days, a winter weather advisory wasn't just an invitation to swap flip-flops for boots. It was nature's way of saying, "Hold on to your top hats, folks. It's going to be quite the ride. Allow me to transport you to a time when the simple act of opening your front door in January resembled a scene from a magic act. Behold," you might declare, stepping outside, only to disappear into a snowdrift rivaling Mount Everest in miniature. When Mother Nature's artistic tendencies seem boundless, townsfolk, armed with nothing more than shovels and several layers of woolen undergarments, applied themselves to the Sisyphean task of reclaiming their roads, homes, and sanity from her icy embrace. Let's meander for a moment into the heart of Wales, where the little village of Llangyniday found themselves in the winter ale of 1886. On that particular occasion, the snow came down with the urgency of a toddler demanding his third bedtime story. The blizzard hit with a bracing intensity that turned the mundane into the mythic. Local gossip had it that one never-before-seen resident, old Mrs. Davies, was actually caught mid-knitting under a particularly thick layer of frost before she could sprint inside. Rumour has it, she never dropped a stitch, a feat that deserves praise if only in its indifference to both snow and circumstance. While modern snowplows sleepily yawn to life today in the wee morning hours, our historical counterpart, typically a grumpy horse and an older man named Mortimer, took to the streets at the crack of dawn, the pair grudgingly pushing heaps of snow as if considering whether they were more snow movers or performance art pieces in a wintry opera. The narrative of snow-laden eras is often accompanied by the sort of stoic community theatre where Mr. Jones reenacts the saga of the frozen indoor. Ensure, if you will, his heroic efforts to stage his own entry, though admittedly less successful than Shackleton's polar expedition, provide the town's version of compelling drama. Snowbanks, of course, were only half the mischief. In the good-hearted spirit of battling Mother Nature's chill tricks, enterprising youngsters set to mischief of their own. Let's take 10-year-old Ewan, a boy with a mop of hair I could only describe as a robust bundle of hay. During the long winter of '86, Ewan harnessed the simple marvel of physics by converting a doorway into the Olympic curling venue, though substituting curling stones with a slightly dented kettle and executing sweeping maneuvers with a cast-off broom. That beloved makeshift rink became the stage for childhood epics, where both kettle and kettlemaster would bravely clink into the frosted abyss of parental scolding. Not to be overlooked, bastions of warmth, such as pubs and hearths, became local bastions against the tyranny of the cold. These social hearths pulsed with the life of the town, steaming mugs of mulled cider, warming fingertips as old tales grew more colourful with each refilled cup. The local bards' stories, like the aforementioned Gale, often came in thick flurries of exaggeration, bringing forth such fictional flights of fancy that the boundary between history and a wonderfully ridiculous yarn blurred utterly, remarkably, charmingly. While the snow knew no gentleman's hour, easing out long enough to allow newer snow to join the dance, human spirit seldom faltered. If ever a town needed a lullaby sung by a snowstorm, this was it. In Langenede, winter became a canvas for communal memory, painted with elder anecdotes told by the fireside, and youth's playful giggles echoing in crisp air. As our yarn continues to unravel, one can only wonder what other stories might be buried beneath these white lands, waiting for the curious heart or cautious step to uncover them. In the white wilderness of yesteryear, there was a quaint little village tucked away in the folds of a remote valley, as if someone had cradled it in their hands, whispering a gentle lullaby. This was no ordinary village. It possessed a curious reputation that preceded it like a particularly punctual blizzard. You see, this village had a propensity for vanishing under the most poetic of meteorological phenomena, snow. As winter wrapped its icy arms around the region, the local inhabitants would brace themselves for an unusual annual event. Like clockwork, the town's beleaguered town crier would shuffle to the village square, his bell in rhythm with his words that tumbled through frosty morning air, announcing the seemingly trivial yet ominous winter weather advisory. Though never panicked, the townsfolk nodded solemnly while secretly measuring the severity of the snowfall by how much of the local blacksmith's mustache was concealed under frost. Once, during the winter not so fondly remembered as the year of forgettable seasonings, the advisory came with a light-hearted twist. It began, amusingly enough, with a prediction for gusty winds that would grant even the most ancient of dried leaves one last ballet recital. Yet what followed in the days after was a heavy cloak of "Where did my front door go snow?" People cheerfully admired the fluffy white veil that enveloped their homes as if it were a romantic gift from nature until, quite literally, they were boxed in by the universe's sneeze-worthiest feat. Picture a town that, overnight, looked more like an elaborate ice palace designed by an overzealous elf with a penchant for maximalism. Houses were reduced to little more than benumbed humps, topped with decorative chimneys, pondering existence, while confused puffs of smoke attempted acrobatics in their escape to the sky. Villagers awoke to a muffled world where even the distinctive clangor of Harold the blacksmith's dubious anvils seemed whimsical and far away. Attempts to navigate this new terrain transcended into comedy, with the noblest of villagers resorting to a form of vertical spelunking through surreptitious doors dug through drift and mystery. This, of course, begat a new art form, the Great Snow Tunnel, crafted not of practical need, but rather an enamored pursuit of spatial awareness, like groundhogs trying to one-up each other with borrowed human ambition. Lest you think these villagers merely succumbed to such a wintry overture, I assure you, their resilience ran deep. They were, after all, well prepared with the vilest of hot concoctions known as brew of the blizzard, a dubious drink consisting of herbs whose origins and functions were as mysterious as the secret of the mountain snowbank whispers. This potion purportedly fortified the soul and, as legend had it, aided in discerning roof from road. In such protracted snowscapes, the locals partook in a veritable symphony of silence, interspersed with the comforting, brawny banter of neighborly shoveling. The task performed less out of necessity and more as a dramatic performance of community choreography. And let us not forget the children, whose antics approximated the discovery of Narnia at every snow-laden threshold, trusting that their wooden sleds towed them not to school, but to heroic stomping grounds of their restless imaginations. As the blizzards whispered goodnight and the village slowly re-emerged from its polar cocoon, The townsfolk reflected on their days of roguish whiteness and improbable pathways. More than a contingency plan, the unwritten rhythm of this snowy village became a tradition born of reminiscence and wry tales passed to the next generation. It was a testament to their camaraderie, an emotionally insulated armor crafted in sweet accord with the unpredictable charms of nature. Someday, they mused, their encumbered town would be remembered not merely for its vanished form, but for the warmth in its core, despite hydraulics of Arctic embrace. And so, this chapter melts quietly into the next, as we turn our gaze upon another time, another tale where winter's grip was softened by human spirit and a pinch of humor to ward off the chills. Cozy up, dear listener, as sleep paddles gently on the horizon, in the dim glow of evening lanterns swaying gently in hearth-heated homes. There unfolds a curious tale not often found in thick tomes or academic scrolls. It's the story of one Sir Clarence Thistlewood, a man of impeccable manners and, unfortunately for him, ill-placed optimism. Hailing from the snowy expanses of 18th century Yorkshire, Sir Clarence found himself embroiled in a most absurd affair, a winter advisory of epic proportions, during which entire towns seemed to vanish beneath nature's vast white quilt. Now, every small town in Yorkshire knew the ghastly grip of winter, those harrowing months when snow piled like whipped cream atop the village rooftops and streets disappeared under frosty blankets. It was as though the landscape, tired of the ordinary hues of brown and green, decided to dress in glistening white. And Sir Clarence, beloved by the townsfolk for his peculiar penchant for predictably wrong predictions, somehow found himself as the unerring voice of winter advisories. Picture, if you will, a chap whose understanding of meteorology was akin to a duck's aptitude for opera. Yet the good townspeople listened intently, for the spectacle more so than the forecast. One particularly frigid week, when the wind howled like a pack of petulant poodles and snowflakes twirled giddily like ballroom dancers in the air, it was time once again for Sir Clarence to make his customary proclamation. With his trusty weather vane pointing optimistically towards, well, every direction at once, Sir Clarence peered from his frost-encrusted window. Thick spectacles perched on the bridge of his frost-nipped nose, he made his declaration with great fanfare and a sweeping gesture that nearly sent his glass of grog tumbling with the sheer exuberance of it all. "Dear friends and frost-bound comrades," he began, ignoring the misshapen snowball hurtling toward him from a mischievous child, which would have been quite the omen had he seen it coming. "Fear not, for this snow will be but a dusting." The gathering crowd let out a collective sigh, which, given the temperature, formed a cloud of surprising magnitude. Then they returned to their cozy homes, reassured and certain of an early spring. By dawn, confidence in Sir Clarence's pronouncement was seen plastered across the village, with snowplows accidentally shifted to the back barn. A metaphorical shrug was shared by those with an intimate understanding of Yorkshire winters. Alas, the town awoke imprisoned by walls of snow higher than a well-fed Shetland pony. Houses were engulfed in the frozen deluge, their chimneys smouldering gently out of the alabaster sea, resembling pipe-smoking trolls having a rather lazy day. Sir Clarence, somewhat resembling an oversized snowdrop, due to his robes and mid-snow scramble around the town, quickly realized that optimistic predictions were better reserved for summer fetes and not the whims of winter gales. Of course, life did not come to a frozen halt. The villagers, seasoned as they were, set about their business cheerfully, tunneling as if they were part-time moles and fashioning networks of snowy labyrinths that were the envy of neighboring towns. And within this whimsical maze, Sir Clarence stumbled upon an epiphany, or perhaps just tripped over an errant pile of snow. He realized the magnitude of a good cup of cocoa and the kindness of friends during a fierce winter's grip. As the night settled in, with stars twinkling like gracefully scattered jewels across the inky vault of the sky, the village choir, muffled and resembling berobed penguins, emerged to serenade the chattering rooftops. Their melodies wove through the frosty air, tucking the townsfolk into the warmth of their homes like a snug, woolen blanket. Sir Clarence Thistlewood, nestled by his hearth with a cup of steaming cocoa in hand, marveled at the gentle hum of life persisting in the chilled embrace of winter. There was no scorn for his well-intentioned misjudgments, just merry acceptance and a handful of gentle ribbings. As the embers in the fireplace flickered soft golden hues across his cozy den, a serenity took root deeper than any drift of snow. Outside, winter stood patient, a testament to nature's whims and human hilarity alike. Inside, friendships and stories simmered as sweetly as mulled cider. With a contented heart, Sir Clarence pondered the day's whimsical adventures, each chuckle sowed with warmth and good cheer. And thus, with this poetic snowfall drawing a curtain of even quieter peace over the town, we leave our shivering adventurers for a moment, our journey whispering gently into the next chapter, where perhaps more surprises await beneath winter's gentle embrace, across the vast frosty plains of Norse mythology, where gods reside among the whispering northern winds and snowflakes fall with the determined patience of a Viking who's misplaced his longboat, exists a tale of wintry humor and the gentle persistence of time. One might think that weather back then was just part of the daily backdrop for the Pantheon's heroics, or that Thor was too busy throwing thunderbolts to notice the chilly draft. But alas, the reality was a bit more snowy. Let us delve into the icy embrace of one particular winter that attempted to outdo even the most boastful of sagas. Back in those fjord-filled days, when you couldn't swing a rune without hitting a hearty Viking, the concept of a weather advisory was about as non-existent as a smartphone battery on its last 1%. One might think these bold adventurers simply shook the snow off their helmets and carried on. However, even the mighty are at the mercy of nature's whims, and this winter was one for the sagas. Well, the first draft sagas. Picture, if you will, a small village tucked amongst the craggy hills that seemed carved from icy whispers. A village where each cottage was barely distinguishable from snowdrift, each house roof heavily burdened like the fabled trickster Loki after a night of particularly mischievous revelry. With each nightfall, the snow crept up the walls until windows became mere portholes from which to glimpse a white world of quietude and inevitable frostbite. One particularly spirited soul, by the name of Gudrun Olafsdottir, possessed the village's sole shovel, a device of such legendary inconvenience that men wrote songs to complain about its blisters rather than pen-odes of its functionality. She wielded it with the fervor of someone determined to tunnel through time itself. She was a vision. Her every swing was an orchestrated ballet of defiance against the weather gods, who were presumably watching from their cloud couches, mildly amused. Every dawn she would challenge the storm's fresh canvas, transforming mounds of snow into paths, if only briefly, before the inevitable blanket returned. Her neighbors often pondered, as they peered over their morning stew, how such a sliver of determination could reside in a person small enough to stand on her doorstep, with her head barely reaching the doorknob. Yet Gudrun was undeterred. Perhaps she saw the snow not as an obstacle, but an opportunity, a chance to outwit the elements with sheer stubbornness and a touch of sarcastic wit. After all, in an age without central heating, persistence was the best spoon one could ladle into life's hearty stew. While Gudrun busily carved paths, the local Jarl, enthroned comfortably in his snow-buried high seat, saw business potential through a fog of scarce visibility. Ingenious thoughts spun in his mind, akin to ice spirals in a mug of steaming mead. Thus, he decreed that any able-bodied individual who could see above the snow-covered rooftops while standing on their own two boots should henceforth climb skywards to observe enemies who might unfortunately arrive without much Nordic hospitality. Villagers, mildly entertained by the challenge rather than its practicality, took to stacking whatever they found in their snowbound homes: stools, pots, unsent love letters. Towers of dubious stability rose across the hamlet, akin to the tales of Yggdrasil, but sourced from readily available refuse. Once atop, villagers struggled to spot anything past blinding fields of white, and the occasional wayward bird that seemed puzzled by the sheer ridiculousness of the scene below. As destiny dictated, no foreign raiders emerged from the frigid horizon. Little did the beings above realize, perhaps the threat was not from rival clans this year, but the very walls of snow which cushioned their sound. You could sleep. Peace prevailed, along with a strangely enduring camaraderie. Gudrun's shovel, now heralded as an instrument of mild community fame, had fostered unity amid ice fields. The winter receded, as winters are wont to do, and the thaw unveiled a village curiosity-filled, bonded by tales of stacked dreams and snowbound ingenuity. Thus ends our gentle meander through a time when weather truly meant all the world to a tiny village. Let's quietly retire our thoughts for now, coating them in blankets of imagination and kind humor, as nature slowly draws its curtains of sleep across the northern sky, inviting us gently forward into the softness of dreams yet unspun. Nestled in the shadow of the grand untamed Alps, the Italo-Swiss village of Valtellina was known for three things: its mouth-watering pizzocchery, folk songs comparing the prowess of goats, and an uncanny talent for disappearing under layers of snow. Residents had developed a system as effective as it was peculiar. When winter made its anticipated, yet still surprising, entrance, each year townsfolk gathered at the town square, whispering nearly magical spells known only to those who had unlocked the secrets of snow removal and reappearances. The town's relationship with snowfall was like a long-winded game of hide and seek, with Mother Nature often winning due to her sheer persistence in piling delightful, yet inconvenient, blankets of fluff over market stalls, winding streets, and hapless sheep that wandered too far from barn doors. Of course, this mutual understanding, or misunderstanding, led to many quaint traditions that ran like clockwork. "Ah, today is the day," old Nonna Rosa would declare every year at precisely the stroke of winter's cold heart. She'd be wrapped in layers of wool that repelled the chill better than any modern marvel, and she wielded a wooden spoon, her wand against both unruly grandkids and menacing snowflakes. The town's response to a winter weather advisory was a spectacular ballet of practical jokes shared between villagers and the elements. Much like an opera that gets accidentally rewritten by a slightly eccentric composer, the scene unfolded with a whimsical predictability. Every adult transitioned from daily tasks to wielding brooms and shovels with the synchronization of ants intent on relocating their mound. As the snowflakes danced downward, young Stefan, dreamy-eyed and bare-kneed, would always venture into the thick of it, armed with a heroic narrative. Stefan was convinced he was a great explorer, charting uncharted icelands. His grandmother indulged him with tales as tall as the surrounding mountains, where yetis befriended the bravest of boys and fed them strudel, which was half made of sugar and half of imaginary creatures' kindness. Yet Stefan's explorations served a practical purpose. He often returned with news of hidden doorways that needed clearing, or goats who'd managed to perch themselves on rooftops, which, Stefan claimed, was clearly the doing of mischievous imps. Through his storytelling, entire paths were unearthed by giggling villagers eager to hear him recount how a single snowflake could tickle a dragon's nose. At the heart of Valtellina's winterly rebirth was Bartolo, owner of the finest ski workshop in all of the Alps, and a mustachioed wonder who had once fashioned ski lifts from nothing but sturdy rope and the kind of optimism that baffles outsiders. His skied machinations were known far and wide, frequently the subject of folklore that often got more tangled than the yarn mittens he wore. His skis were masterpieces, renowned for convincing even the snow drifts themselves to part or, if feeling particularly generous, form into neat jumps over which daring skiers could soar. In Bartolo's ingenious designs lay the truth of Valtellina's habit of reappearing each winter. Transformation, rather than resistance, was the key. While snowfall muffled the world, within it, joy and laughter echoed in invisible choruses. It was a secret indulgence for the villagers to vanish beneath the snow's hush, only to re-emerge like a magician's final act, grinning widely and covered in confetti white. One winter's day, as the sun stretched its golden fingers over peaks and slopes, The snow's depth threatened to form permanent igloos of Valtellina's homes. But Bartolo, Saint Ski of the slopes, fashioned a ski sled that could traverse impossible drifts, thus ensuring the perennial resurrection of streets that had apparently decided to vacation under the snow. As afternoon dimmed into evening and the village slowly emerged from its wintry veil with paths cleared and goats retrieved, another winter weather advisory arrived, unnoticed by Valtellina's folks, already indulging in the warmth of community and imagination. And so the dance would continue, a never-ending waltz with winter's capriciousness, full of mystery and mirth, fading gracefully into the haze of "We'll carry you softly into another tale. We'll carry you softly into another tale, yet to unfold." As the winds of February whipped through the town of Sleep-Bottom, its virtues hummed louder than its humble reputation suggested. Nestled beneath swirling clouds that blanketed everything in undulating sheets of white, this little settlement was all but consumed in winter's frosty embrace. Folks here weren't just inhabitants, but seasoned veterans of the siege against the elements. Think of it like a community snow globe, vigorously shaken by an over-enthusiastic giant. Once upon a particularly fine, frosty dusk, when snowflakes wove themselves into impressive thermal tapestries across front porches, standing precariously high like sleepy alabaster sentinels, townsfolk huddled indoors, engaging in their wintertime rituals. Chester Wumblethorpe, the famed hatter of Sleep-Bottom, made his evening rounds not for new headwear, but for news. Clad in wool and more wool, his presence was more akin to a four-legged walking cushion than a man bent on conversation. He had a curious habit of glancing at pedestrians' heads as if every noggin was a potential canvas for his millinery masterpieces. Now, Chester wasn't just a purveyor of fine hats, but also a keen observer of the human condition, especially with regard to headwear choices in winter. He often quipped, "A satisfied head is a warm one," as he meticulously crafted fur-lined hats with enough insulation to withstand an iceberg's best attempt at scalping. Arguably, he was the town's most cherished fashionista, which says something about Sleep-Bottom's sense of style, and gossip harbinger, a sort of hatted herald, if you will. This evening, however, was different. As Chester idly chatted with Elsie, the only person daring enough to keep her shop open during a gentle blizzard, they harped on the day's excitement, a winter weather advisory that was whispered to cause entire towns like theirs to vanish under Mother Nature's feathery onslaught. Well, not really. But in Sleep-Bottom, such tales flurried faster than the weather itself. Once Chester had gathered enough town tittle-tattle to stitch a story warmer than his latest hat collection, he knew it was only polite to carry his newfound knowledge along to the community hearth, a place where information was exchanged over steaming mugs of cozy camaraderie. Picture, if you will, Tuesday night fireside chat that thawed even the most icicle-laden of heartstrings. The fire crackled rhythmically while Chester recounted, with a slight penchant for humor, the hardships faced during last year's invisible town exercise. It was a test of true grit and wit, he mused, when locals had to navigate between milk and fresh produce in a landscape akin to living inside a sugar bowl. As his pitchy tale swirled with the smoke, townsfolk leaned in with bated breaths, their chairs inching closer to the warmth of both company and hearth. Even Benedict, the town's stickler for historical accuracy, settled comfortably into the spectacle of Chester's exaggerated storytelling. Though Benedict would often interject with corrections like "technically" or "to be historically precise" during this gathering, he simply smiled, contented by the mirth rather than the facts. However, when Chester suggested the snow could rival the infamous blizzards of '81, a gentle guffaw erupted, not because Chester's tale was implausible, but because folks trusted in such yarns as comforting biospheres. They too knew that last year's snowfall was much less about snowdrifts reaching church steeples and much more about the opportunity it presented to bond over shared shoveling duties. And so, wrapped in a cherished cocoon of fellowship and really thick blankets, the townsfolk of Sleep-Bottom awaited the snow that could make them vanish once more. But in wintertime, camouflage rather than existential thought. To be truthful, They welcomed their seasonal metamorphosis into a monochrome wonderland like an old friend returning to spin wondrous tales. And as Chester tipped his own hat to bid farewell for the night, a gentle promise hung in the air, whispered by the wind through the cracks of aging timber, that always, in the face of nature's whims, camaraderie had the warmth to pull anyone through. And so, with roofs half seen beneath their sculpted white armor, the people of Sleep-bottom returned to their homes, carrying the warmth of shared laughter as they tucked themselves under cozy quilts. Their world was hushed, but far from silent, the potential for another day's story brimming like a cauldron about to spill over. As they drifted off to sleep, snowflakes continued their silent, unrelenting dance, performing an encore that would segue gracefully into yet another chapter of this endless winter. 8. Spectacle. As the gentle breath of winter settled over Europe in the late 17th century, the world was not prepared for the frosty shenanigans that would unfold like a mysteriously vanishing left sock. You see, there was a time when winter meant more than just donning a slightly thicker scarf and sipping cocoa with marshmallows. It was an era where a simple winter weather advisory could blanket entire towns in snow, eliciting collective sighs and muted exclamations of, "Oh, not this again," from the good folk who called these snowy hamlets home. In 1683, an unassuming year punctuated with taffeta and lace, Europe was gifted with a particularly frosty treat. The River Thames, usually known for its jolly ferrying of cargo and scandalous elopements, turned into a solid sheet of ice. Now, dear listener, this was not your ordinary pedestrian sheet of frozen water. It was an event worthy of transformation, like a caterpillar morphing into a butterfly. Or perhaps, more accurately, a caterpillar deciding to put on an extravagant ice carnival. The people of London, ever resourceful and delightfully British, decided that a solid river was no reason to be distressed. Oh no, they saw an opportunity for one of the most whimsical festivals in history, the Great Frost Fair. The icy expanse became a lively thoroughfare of merriment and wonder, a dazzling spectacle that could easily have dazzled the stiffest of upper lips. Picture it, if you will. Great roaring fires crackling along the ice, warming toes and spirits alike. Every few feet, a booth offering warming libations, because one needed something to thaw out the fingertips after attempting to bowl a turkey down an icy lane. A sport enjoyed by those adventurous enough to fancy an impromptu turkey escape. Yes, it's true. The Thames hosted not just vendor stalls and puppet shows, but indeed turkey bowling, an event that challenged both balance and poise, often resulting in nothing but feathered chaos and laughter. Continuing down the ice, you'd note the curious blending of the highbrow and the slightly absurd. Over there, a stage set for a play, the actors pausing mid-soliloquy to regain their footing on the slippery surface. Nearby, some entrepreneurial soul was offering ice-shaving haircuts, the end result ambitious yet unpredictable. And at the heart of all this was the grand spectacle. An elephant, for you see, it was quite the marvel to parade across the frozen river. It was as if someone had exclaimed, "Let's make this winter unforgettable by having a pachyderm roam on the ice." And no one dared question it. While this frosty whimsy played out, whispers of the frost's breath reached far and wide. From the icy fjords of Scandinavia, where snow was like an extra family member, often named Lars or Ingrid, to the sporadically heated conversations of Parisian coffeehouses, everybody was abuzz with tales of peculiar weather. With each retelling, the stories grew more colorful than Napoleon's most ambitious battle plans. In neighboring Holland, the sudden chill transformed networks of canals into highways of ice. Of course, in true Dutch spirit, there was skating involved. Speed skating was both a necessity and a delightful distraction from the burden of trade, and much like people from the future yearning for Wi-Fi, it captivated the masses. The Dutch, with their wooden skates cutting graceful arcs across nature's wintry canvas, slid through villages with the ease and fluidity of a brush dabbing ink on parchment. It was a season where Mother Nature reminded everyone of her impish sense of humor, transforming geography into temporary playgrounds. Each snowflake contained whispered secrets, and every breath of wind carried hints of stories that would only become legends of cozy hearthside tales. And so, as the ice groaned beneath the weight of laughter and unexpected festivities, Time herself sat back with a chuckle, tucking this winter deep into the folds of history. It was a delicate ballet of frost and folly, where communities proved their mettle in the face of chilly odds. With the frost fair melting snugly into memory, focus shifts effortlessly, like a cat finding a new sunbeam, onward to another unfolding tale where we'll discover an era where almanacs and omens could forecast more than just the weather, but the very fate of kingdoms. So fluff your pillow and nestle deeper as we continue into another yarn spun with history's understated humor. Once upon a frosty evening, nestled deep within the bosom of the 19th century, a quaint village prepared quietly for its dreary winter's rest. This was a time when news that a blizzard was sweeping across the lands did not prompt last-minute grocery runs or trigger frantic checks of hourly weather apps. Oh no, my dear listener. In those days, the villagers simply had one word for it: Thursday. Our tale takes us to the unassuming hamlet of Whispermere, which was known not so much for its hospitality or scenic charm, but rather for its curiously recurring feature of disappearing entirely under snowbanks so vast that cartographers eventually resorted to sketching it in pencil, a practical nod to how fleeting the village's visibility tended to be. The folk of Whispermere had a rather leisurely attitude towards meteorology. The town's official weather advisor was Old Man Nebbins, whose reputation as a climatological seer rested on nothing more than his distractingly long acquaintance with knobbly arthritic fingers and the conviction that a mild ache in his big toe portended an avalanche of frozen precipitation. If Nebbins was right, he was considered brilliant. If he was wrong, well, it was snowing anyway. Each home in Whispermere resembled a relic of antiquity, with roofs that seemed to delight in defying gravity while simultaneously nurturing moss gardens year-round. The villagers were an innovative bunch, though, and adapted to their snowy, cloaking by digging tunnels from one neighbor to the next, resulting in a labyrinthine network best traversed with a seasoned guide or accompanied by at least one eligible local cat who could find its way about in the darkest winter nights. These feline escorts, often notorious for their finicky midday naps, would proudly deliver straggling visitors back to their rightful homes, though sometimes after leading them in merry circles first. Yet Whispermere was populated by more than just humans and opinionated cats. It was a haven for livestock that endured the season's furious flurries with admirable stoicism. Neighbors claimed that, on hearing a storm was brewing, the sheep developed a remarkable penchant for fashioning fortresses from wool, proving themselves adept decorators in the art of hig and making Denmark extremely jealous without even knowing it. Returning to our main character, the aforementioned Nebbins, who possessed a peculiar collection of journals kept for predicting winter weather. Each page contained erratic squiggles, later discovered to be the result of Nebbins' decision to write with the nib clamped between his toes for better accuracy. The villagers rarely understood the symbols, but they trusted that Nebbins himself would reveal what was truly needed. A simple nod, signaling whether it was time to stoke the fireplace again or to start carving new tunnel paths between homes. So as you nestle deeper among your cozy blankets, envision the delightful chaos and cooperative spirit that emerged each winter in Whispermere, a town perpetually shrouded in its white winter garb, gripped by the humorous expectations of a querulous toe and its yarn-spinning owner. Yet underneath layers of snow and blankets, the true secret of the town was not merely surviving the season, but thriving in its curious symbiosis with nature's chilly embrace. With the calendar locked in what seemed a perpetual Thursday, life in Whispermere meandered, charmingly onward, perhaps ready to surprise Nebbins and its populace with the one thing truly harder to predict than a snowstorm: spring. As you gently drift closer to dreams, picture the ease with which the days overlap into nights under Whispermere's snowy quilt, and as we embrace the next softly whispered secret of days gone by, in the quaint and curious village of Frostview, Nestled between the gentle arms of two snow-capped hills, the phrase "winter weather advisory" conjured images of poetic tranquility and pastoral peace. Little did the inhabitants know, these casual proclamations were closer to declarations of epic snow sieges that would leave them submerged in all things frosty, flaky, and altogether fantastic. It was in this very village, sometime during the particularly ferocious winter of 1816, known lovingly by historians as the year without a summer due to the eruption of Mount Tambora. No, not short for tambourine, though the eruption had shaken the atmosphere like one, that our story takes a fittingly brisk turn. As the east wind whistle-stitched its melody across the rooftops, the citizens of Frostview exchanged knowing nods as they prepared for what could only be described as ultimate hibernation. Now the town's mayor, one Jasper Crumbottom, whose surname inspired precisely 0 bakery-themed businesses, much to everyone's bewilderment, had the clever, perhaps inspired idea to initiate Frostview's very first snowed-in society. This improvised club, founded in the heart of the local tavern, the Frosty Pint, revolved around 3 founding principles: stockpiling hot cocoa, perfecting the art of competitive chess, and reallocating the village library's entire collection to the warmth of the tavern's oversized hearth. With the soft creaking of snow-laden roofs providing a gentle, albeit precarious underscoring, villagers settled into their new routine. Even as snow piled up to their gables, familial bonds grew warmer. Rivalries turned to rummy games, and the floor-to-ceiling stash of cocoa seemed a little closer to bottomless. Aunt Mildred's legendary apple strudel, with its recipe as secret as the meeting notes of the snowed-in society, became the stuff of local lore. An aroma so intoxicating it nearly melted the snow itself. Of course, for the youth trapped, or perhaps snugly encased, within Frostview's impromptu fortress, the outside world presented a wonderland of snowy escapades. While grown-ups pondered over chessboards, the youngest residents turned the snowbanks into fortresses of laughter, welding imagination with fallen tree branches and the occasional borrowed scarf. These children, blissfully unaware of any snow-shoveling Gordian knot afflicting the adults, believed in their hearts the snow to be a benevolent giant, playful and infinite, much like their time concealed beneath its frothy blanket. One pivotal night, as flickering candlelight cast shadows that danced gently on the Frosty Pint's walls, Mayor Crumbottom, between calculated sips of cider, proposed a toast, raising his clay mug, a sign itself testament only to the durability of local craftsmanship. He declared the current snowfall status, boldly staving off further snow rituals. His syntax, perhaps a mite swirled by the cider, ended humorously with, "Here's to our humble frozen abode, and may it defrost only when our cocoa stocks are truly nigh." This gathering, this quaint show of resilience amid a robustly temperamental winter, would later be reflected upon by the townsfolk as an era of great coziness, one where time seemed to solidify, alongside ice, in a special sort of timeless suspension. Frostview, locked in an embrace with its snow-clad visage, discovered an unexpected tenderness beneath its crystalline layers. And so, with the echoes of casseroles passed round communal tables, the pages of print novels earned their worth twice, over by providing both narrative and insulation. And the laughter, oh how it pressed gently against the icy window panes, keeping them plied and warm. Indeed, as merry songs faded softly with evening skies, the world outside patiently awaited the sound of the thaw, knowing it too had a season in its turn. But for now, in the charm of wintry hibernation, Frostview lay bedded in peace, veiled in dreams of seasons long past and those yet to come. It was the perfect setting for sweet slumber, where one could trust the snow to blanket all things mundane and leave the mind, free at last, to wander in gentle wonderment. And so, as another candle sputtered its final glow, the pages turned softly to what lay ahead, their lessons cast not in words, but in warmth. As the sun began its lazy descent beneath the horizon, painting the sky with hues of lavender and peach, a sense of calm wrapped the tiny historic village of Snowsville. Nestled in a secluded valley where winters were more than just a season but an entire way of life. Inhabitants lived by one steadfast rule: never underestimate a weather advisory. Now, in the late 19th century, weather advisories were less a science and more of a dark art, predicted by those rugged souls daring enough to climb hills and gaze at the clouds with the intensity of a Victorian detective suspecting a plot. One such sky whisperer was Old Man McGregor, whose remarkable ability to predict snowfall was matched only by the size of his beard, which many claimed had its own microclimate. One autumn eve, as geese honked their way south and the trees shook off their leaves like tired dancers shedding costumes after a marathon show, McGregor took to the hill. Beneath the gnarled old oak that had witnessed enough winters to qualify as an honorary snowman, he squinted skyward, looking for signs in the clouds as though deciphering a cryptic message left by higher powers, or perhaps just a particularly eccentric flock of birds. "Snows are coming," he declared to no one in particular, waving his walking cane in the air as if stirring an invisible pot of stew. Indeed, that seemed like the most crucial forecast tool, waving a cane around as if threatening the clouds into submission. The villagers, familiar with his ritual, nodded knowingly. As snowflakes began to sprinkle from the heavens like confectioner's sugar over a plum pudding, houses were quickly shuttered, and the tavern's lanterns glowed warmly like beacons guiding ships lost in an ocean of time. Village children, wrapped in multiple layers that only allowed for movements akin to stately penguins, cheered and immediately began stockpiling snowballs as if planning a siege on the neighboring town, one cold orb at a time. Inside the snug confines of Mrs. Bramblebottom's kitchen, a snug but bustling locale known for its comforting aromas and multi-generational teapot, preparations commenced for the inevitable snow-in. Mrs. Bramblebottom herself, much like her name implied, was as much a fixture in the community as the cobbled streets. Her biscuits, legendary for both their size and their mysterious ability to disappear within seconds of being placed on a table, were flying off the counter faster than town gossip. Snowfall in Snowsville was not simply a weather phenomenon, but a cherished guest arriving for its annual visit. Blanketing the village in a deep silence that made the world feel new and ancient all at once, it fostered a unique brand of camaraderie found only amongst those who know snow, not merely as precipitation, but as art. Like seasoned performers awaiting their cue, the villagers watched as snowdrifts sculpted delicate lace patterns across rooftops and transformed the mundane street into a pristine carpet of white. At the heart of this miniature world was the tradition of midnight magic, a peculiar celebration held precisely during the first snowstorm. Families gathered by the hearth, tales were spun as thickly as the yarns in Granny Tyndall's knitting, and laughter echoed like music from a long-forgotten waltz. Old Man McGregor, seated by the crackling fire, regaled all with stories of winters long past when horses wore snowshoes, as unconventional as it sounds. And snowmen marched in unison like a regimented army of frosty mirth. As the evening wore on, a gentle snowfall cloaked Snowsville in an almost supernatural tranquility. The village seemed to hold its breath, resting in a landscape caught between slumber and dreamy fantasy. Each flake, unique yet perfectly orchestrated, contributed to the great tapestry that was this snowy night. Our dear villagers, swaddled in blankets as thick as McGregor's beard, drifted toward dreams filled with visions of snow castle battlements and sugar plum fairies that tap-danced upon icy ponds. Snowsville might become a white-out world come morning, but for now, it floated in a cloud-soft bubble where time meandered like lazy river water. And as night deepened over Snowsville, the village nestled into its snowy cocoon, trusting the promise of another winter's tale, to be eagerly embraced when the world warmed once more. Rest well, weary traveller. The dream continues, softly beckoning you further. In the shadowy reaches of snowbound history, there once existed a winter advisory that was the stuff of legends, or at least it would have been if anyone had lived to tell the tale. Imagine, if you will, a quaint little village nestled snug amid the hills, where the townsfolk had the uncanny ability to knit wool mittens at the speed of light and concoct stews robust enough to thaw the iciest of souls. This was a place so picturesque, it could have been plucked straight from a snow globe, shaken up, and set back down with a delicate dusting of glittery frost. But beyond the charm of cheerfully frozen mustaches and the communal crackle of fireplace logs, there lingered an unassuming seasonal menace, the winter weather advisory. In the days before apps and satellite imagery, warnings were delivered through the town's resident weather wizards, one part clairvoyant, one part hardy meteorologist, who predicted the winter's onslaught with nothing more than the twitches of their weather-beaten big toe. Now, the fearsome advisory in question did not bear the ominous name of a blizzard, nor did it herald the aggressive frostbite of a polar vortex. No, this was simply known as a wintry mix, a term seemingly chosen at random by a meteorological committee who had decided that mild inconvenience wasn't quite serious enough. Little did the townsfolk know, this seemingly benign alert was a harbinger of monumental snowdrifts capable of amalgamating entire neighborhoods into one indistinct pile of fluff. On a fateful morning, the town arose to an eerie silence, the kind that ensues when the vast white world outside consumes every sound. Doors creaked open gingerly, only for their inhabitants to discover that steps, stoops, and even fences had vanished overnight, swallowed by a majestic avalanche of clouds that seemed to have descended from the very heavens. You might wonder if the townsfolk panicked, but no, they did quite the opposite. A culture accustomed to the capriciousness of winter, they donned their overalls and waded into the snowy abyss with the same fortitude one might bring to a casual walk in the park. As intrepid as capybaras in a sunken Amazon rainforest, they bobbed along, pathfinding through underpasses of snow and inventing scenic routes where none were intended. Emerging from this Arctic dreamscape with noses like ripe tomatoes, they formed chains of humans, passing essentials such as mugs of hot cocoa and constellations of biscuits from house to house. The local general store saw a curious boom in the sale of snowshoes and eccentric knitting patterns, yet the villagers' spirits sailed high on the frothy zephyrs of camaraderie. During this peculiar period, historical records recount the remarkable invention of town tunnels, those meticulous passages burrowed expertly beneath the snow, which, when viewed from above, rendered the village map looking favorably akin to a particularly abstract spider web. Scholarly debate persists over the level of strategic cooperation or possible crazed coffee-fueled improvisation that led to this achievement. As days turned into weeks and the novelty of snow tunnels began to wane, warmer thoughts of springtime filled the villagers' hearts and minds. It became an unsaid competition to predict the first sprout's defiance against the undying winter. The celebration of this moment, whenever it arrived, was marked by ecstatic shouts muffled gently by the snow, boiling stews, and a dozen newly inspired ballads sung around fires. In the undeniable wisdom that only comes from imperceptible amounts of experience in handling extreme weather, or perhaps after one too many sips of homemade liquors duly fermented over winter nights, the villagers had unwittingly redefined the very purpose of a winter weather advisory. From warning of peril, these words became calls to unite, to find extraordinary ways amidst the mundane, and a gentle reminder that even amid avalanches of the inevitable, there lies humor, resilience, and warmth. As our narrative tapestry unravels further into the frosty embrace of history, let us meander with grace toward the shimmering horizon, allowing ourselves to drift peacefully into the comforting quiet of winter's lullaby. For beyond this chapter, a whisper of more tales awaits, promising to wrap us once more in the soft woven lies of historical oddities. Until then, rest gently in the arms of this snowy reverie. In the frosty embrace of 1805, the world did not yet know jigsaw puzzles, elevator music, or even TikTok dances to while away the long winter nights. The most thrilling winter activity, among others, was dodging hypothermia. The town of Thwing, nestled snugly in North Yorkshire, a place so delightfully obscure it could make a hermit crab feel outgoing, was no exception. Every winter, it danced delicately on a razor's edge between a spectacular winter wonderland and an impending disaster movie. The townsfolk of Thwing possessed a peculiar quality, a devotion to their collective winter traditions that could only be described as committed. They believed in something known as Snow Tolerance Day, an unofficial holiday occurring quite sincerely on any day the snow piled higher than a particularly tall horse. The festivities involved drinking a warm concoction strangely reminiscent of boiled socks, which, to their limited awareness, was quite possibly the case, followed by competitive sledding down the village hill on anything that wasn't nailed down. Oh, you would not want to be a stray wooden door on such a day. Of course, February 8th, 1805, was one such infamous snow tolerance day that would lead to a tale worthy of bedtime whispers. The snow began at dawn, and with the stubbornness of an insistent toddler, refused to ease up. By noon, it was stacking up like books in the grand libraries of the future. A white carpet draped over the village, frosted rooftops peeking out like whipped cream on a carrot cake you couldn't eat. Because, well, it was a town. Amidst this wintry siege, Jeff, the village blacksmith renowned for his towering stature and an endearing lack of spatial awareness, attempted what the brave might call an expedition. Armed with nothing but a woolen scarf and burlap boots, Jeff stepped outside, determined to procure libations for the inevitable snow tolerance celebrations. As he trudged through drifts deeper than a metaphysical debate on the nature of snowflakes, his neighbors watched in a mix of admiration and mild concern for his sanity. Jeff's quest took him to the tavern, a place where wisdom was exchanged over the flicker of candlelight and ale that possibly doubled as paint thinner. Inside, he found camaraderie and the vital cheer needed to stave off the frosty gloom. As mugs clinked and laughter echoed like a misplaced opera in a silent theater. Outside, the snow descended with all the grace and persistence of a bumbling sheepdog herding flakes instead of sheep. By nightfall, Thwing had been transformed into something entirely unrecognizable, a surreal landscape where the tops of trees resembled candle wicks poking through a birthday cake. The entire village, Jeff included, was cocooned beneath snowdrifts so high that one could genuinely lose a short aristocrat in the mess. Villagers resorted to tunneling their way to essential destinations like the bakery or the swiftly snow-entombed post office, with makeshift shovels and comical resolve. Jeff's tunneling prowess was mostly utilized to recover the muffled echoes of Snow Tolerance Day's merriments from the tavern's cheer-spouting hearthside. Now, should you be wondering if such an amount of snow could truly challenge even the hardiest of British? Spirits, I say. Historical records, you see, are like overgrown gardens, full of nettles, but often quite true. That said, this great bug-rounded snowstorm inevitably earned its place in Thwing's history, not only for its sheer volume of crystallized chaos, but for fostering a legendary night of impromptu snow tunnels and the accidental dawning of the town's very own Winter Olympics, all hosted quite unintentionally by the local sheep who happened to excel at downhill slides. Even as the days and nights blended into a monochrome harmony of quiet drifts and suppressed curses, Jeff and his fellow villagers found that being encased in snow was less a crisis and more an opportunity for extended storytelling sessions that rivaled even the most engaging fireside sagas. It is difficult to say if the same tales were told each year, embellished with ever-growing feats and even larger pint glasses, but one might wager that every retelling was, in itself, a triumph of collective memory and imagination. Rest gently now, as the snow falls ever softly upon our story, with Thwing emerging slowly from its chrysalis of cold. The stage whispers its promise, a nudge to remind us that our tale has not yet drifted towards its comforting end. As we dive back into the tapestry of time, imagine quaint towns tucked under toe-thick blankets of fiber-filled clouds, transformed into snow mountains by winter's whisper. Here, in the late 19th century, an entire village in northern Wisconsin, Red Mountain Prairie, found itself lost in not only snowdrifts, but in the footnotes of history. An occurrence officially known as the Great Flurry of 1883 brought utter whiteout, and for a sweet moment, all matters of daily drudgery paused as townsfolk and gophers alike hibernated in cozy idleness. Now, our tale picks up on a gentle morning just after the first snowfall, where life could only be measured by the rise and fall of chimney smoke twirls. Residents of Red Mountain Prairie woke to a silence so complete that it might as well have been bred by an abundance of cotton balls. As they peeked out from beneath goose-feather quilts, they were met with the sight of roofs that seemed to tiptoe above seas of snow and chimneys puffing like spirited little steam engines. Among these roofs, the one belonging to old Mr. Bartholomew Jenkins stood tallest, only by grace of the fact that his great-grandfather had once been denied additional basement space, leading him to build up rather than into the questionable character of the earth. Mr. Jenkins was known for his profound library and an enduring curiosity with the catalogue of clouds. As fortune would have it, his little scientific rain-watching project had forewarned him of the coming snowstorm, or, as he'd been fond of declaring at the general store, a celestial sneeze of epic proportions. With the luxury of this advance notice, Mr. Jenkins had marshalled the town into preparatory actions somewhat akin to bear preparedness for hibernation. Stores were bustled into, and soup stocks were enhanced with a strategic redistribution of peas and carrots. Alas, even with such precautions, no one could have predicted how deeply they'd be buried under snow's gentle siege. The night before the blanket came down, in a cafe that would soon be inaccessible, locals gathered to laugh off their concerns with a cook-off that turned every pot available into a bubbling cauldron of chowder and stew. A memorable evening it was, fueled by tall tales as flavorful as the food, centered around the saga of Elias the Grumpy, and notorious for getting snowed under at least once while visiting relatives in New Hampshire. It always ended with Elias wandering out of a snowbank, clutching a loaf of rye bread as if emerging from a magical realm dedicated to glutinous triumph. So when, by mid-morning, Mabel, town clerk and capable orchestrator of important documents covering tens of miles in varyingly slushy conditions, clambered her way to Mr. Jenkins's back door to borrow his longest ladder, she was solemnly greeted with a steaming mug of cocoa instead. A moment of warmth before you wage war against the frost giants, he chuckled dryly, sending Mabel off with the ladder and a biscuit for her poodle, Sir Fluffs. The rest of the day unfolded in serene adventure as hobbits, respected townspeople, adopted their own whimsical quests. A gathering at the town's only pub ended in muffled cheers as Georgette, innkeeper and unofficial snow captain, announced the first annual snow sculpture showcase, instantly inspiring fierce sculptural competition in the town square. From spiraling towers to behemoth ostriches, judged, nibbled, and eventually devoured when a cozy chill descended, a hidden gem of camaraderie was unearthed. Hours slipped away in whispered laughter and shared astonishment. Faces basked in firelight, until eventually, snow stopped its dominance, leaving enough residue only on hats and in hearts. As horizons softened into evening hues and townsfolk returned to their hearths, it was as if winter's groundwork had set the stage for a community bond as firm as icy tendrils but as warm as mulled cider. With the echoes of cheerful antics now tucked under snug roofs, chimney smoke began to whisper its nightly lullaby once again. A sense of peaceful slumber drew close, like a comforting promise in the frost-laced tapestry of the silent, story-blanketed town. And so, in the drowsy pursuit of dreams, one must wonder what morning's light could reveal next amidst the winter wonderland. As a winter storm approached the quaint village of Winterby-on-the-Wold, the inhabitants braced themselves for the inevitable onslaught of snowflakes, each one a tiny, frozen harbinger of prolonged inconvenience. Winterby-on-the-Wold, nestled snugly between two unimpressive hills that were rarely mentioned in any serious geographical text, prided itself on being one of those delightful places that seem to exist solely to justify the existence of sleds and woolen socks. But this was not just any ordinary storm. No, This was one of those famed snowpocalypses of the past, when the meteorological term light flurries was a euphemism for expect total snowmageddon. In the 1800s, a simple winter weather advisory might just as well have read, "Prepare to lose sight of your barn for a fortnight." The year was a nebulous one, somewhere in the early riffraff of the 19th century, a time when winter could most definitely weaponize itself against poorly planned outfits and rapidly dwindle the coal supplies of even the most capable village shopkeeper. Here, the people of Winterby on the Wold faced the snowstorm with an aplomb exclusive to the English countryside, a stoic mix of determination, complaint, and a posted sign announcing that the annual turnip festival was postponed indefinitely. Let us imagine Farmer Jenkins, who took the impending blizzard as an opportunity to finally complete his ultimate snowpig sculpture, a life-size homage to the pride of his farm, Bessie, the sow. Known for his impromptu agricultural-themed art exhibitions, Jenkins greeted the swirling weather not with dread, but with artistic ambition. His pigs were renowned far and wide, not so much for their aesthetic beauty, but for being the culinary delight of many a winter feast. While villagers could not quite fathom the allure of a frozen swine installation, Jenkins stood alone, well-fed and content under his snow-draped hat. Meanwhile, the village blacksmith, one Reginald Slagmore, considered the need to remain productive even as the frost edged its fingers inside his forge. In an act of unyielding resilience, he crafted what he dubbed the winter sling, a hybrid contraption of sled and bellows, which he confidently claimed could redistribute hot air throughout the village. Unfortunately, the only hot air it produced was from the exhaustive debates about whether such an invention had ever been useful, thoughtful, or remotely justifiable. Over at the apothecary, Mistress Hibblethwaite found her shop bustling, proffering lotions and potions, purportedly warding off seasonal melancholia. For a mere shilling, she'd promise everything short of sunshine bottled within. Her concoctions, though suspiciously reminiscent of last summer's experimental elderflower soda, nonetheless fueled the hopeful while addressing ailments of the purely fantastical nature. And let us not overlook young Tommy Twittle. The enterprising lad observed the mounting drifts, each snowbank a golden opportunity rolled out in white. Tommy crafted a business plan as energetic as it was nonsensical, wherein he offered, for a modest fee, to shovel paths from villagers' front doors directly to their nearest neighbors. In a community where proximity was measured in meters, not miles, his service saw limited demand but excelled in comedic value, as snow buried 8 gateposts and nameless monuments alike, transforming Winterby on the Wold into a scene of untamed wintry abstraction. Something peculiar unfolded. A sense of camaraderie formed beneath the weight of snow-laden eaves. Neighbors gathered in less than enthusiastic clusters around poorly kept hearths, sharing not so much warmth as imagined warmth, the kind that numbed the permeating chill with hearty exaggeration and spirited tales. The storm outside howled its forlorn ballads, while the villagers of Winterby on the Wold found companionship in the shared plight of finding themselves quite literally snowed under. And as the snows continued with whispering tenacity, one couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow might bring when the village emerged, somewhat disoriented, from under its sparkling blanket of frozen silence. In the ebbing moonlight, Farmer Jenkins' snowpig cast a peculiar shadow on the landscape, a lone sentinel amidst the sea of white. Who could say what come morning, beneath layers of frost and humour, would await? The world outside knitted itself a coat of dreams, welcoming the weary into a night stitched with patience and promise, as the tales of how towns vanished under the snow slowly became as soft and elusive as the whispering flakes themselves. As our journey through history's snow-laden cobblestones reaches its final chapter, let us embrace the frosted fringes of time with a gentle sigh, much like an old wooden village yawning beneath a fresh blanket of snow. Picture, if you will, the small, overcrowded towns of yore when a simple winter weather advisory meant more than just a few extra logs on the fire. In times when flocking geese served as more reliable meteorologists than any sage in a long, pointy hat, winter was a master sculptor draping villages in cloaks of white, It was a period when chimney sweeps competed with snowflakes for supremacy, each striving to claim the most territory in a world devoid of central heating or anything resembling a snuggie. Snow was so abundant that it had a particular knack for scaling buildings faster than ivy. Roofs, with their fortified slopes, resembled grand iced cakes topped with a sugary pile suggested by nature herself. A delight to observe, but a challenge to survive under. In towns whose names you'd rather spell than pronounce, villagers concocted ingenious escape tactics to outwit the snow's relentless siege. Consider, for example, the practice of roof leaping, where townsfolk would sprint, leap, and hilariously land from one snow-covered roof to another. It wasn't just a transportation method, but also an early form of Winter Olympics, with points awarded for style, distance, and the amount of rooftops successfully traversed without plummeting into a snowdrift. Meanwhile, the livestock, ever pragmatic, had taken to forming alliances beneath the snow's surface. With torches and mutual warmth, these four-legged conspirators occupied the space beneath barns, leading to the folklore of the Great Barn Underworld, where cows and chickens reportedly engaged in trade negotiations to secure the best hay and nesting rights. Everyday tasks developed an epic flair in the face of such snowbound circumstances. Grocery shopping, for instance, was less about grabbing milk than it was an expedition comparable to seeking the Holy Grail. Villagers trudged to market, swathed in layer upon layer of woolen armor, resembling waddling, chattering snowballs with but a keen resolve and a shopping list. And who could forget the near-mythical figure of the town crier, who in such conditions would emerge more snowman than human, voice heralding through the white abyss, a clarion call announcing, "The old bakery hath scones again." Scones, of course, being the sustenance suitable for any snowstorm survivor worth their salt, or sugar, as the case might be. For cozy interludes, there were community gatherings at the tavern. Here, stories were swapped, weaving dreams with the steam of warming soup and laughter. Poets, both aspiring and surprisingly unaspiring, waxed lyrical about heroic victories over unusually large icicles. Children gawked, and the older villagers nodded, knowing full well they'd be defrosting their toes near the hearth for several hours more. Ah, my weary traveller of times past, as the bustling tales of white winters evolve into soothing whispers of yesteryears, remember that with the snows came a certain softness, the kind that transforms the loudest bluster into hushed serenity. In this serene interlude, somewhere between waning fires and the softly drifting snow outside, let your own dreams meander through imagined landscapes where the snow falls silently, cushioning the earth and the mind. And so, with a gentle nod to history and a faint dusting of humor, we step back from the snowy portals into the warmth of our present cocoon. May the stories of old guide your dreams softly into night, tucked neatly beneath the starry quilt. Until we meet again, in dreams uncharted and tales appearing like whispers, let the winds of history carry you softly into slumber's embrace. The past, dear listener, is now your lullaby.